I never meant to walk into that place. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of gray that feels permanent. Rain was slapping sideways against the subway cars, and I had already missed my stop once because my eyes wouldn't stop blurring from the exhaustion. I worked the closing shift at a downtown dry cleaning depot, a hole in the wall tucked between a liquor store and a pawn shop. My job wasn't complicated. Tag the clothes, steam the suits, hang them in alphabetical order. What was complicated was everything else. The rent was 2 weeks past due. My mom's insulin prescription had doubled, and my little brother, Ezra, had just texted that the electricity at home had cut out again. I was on my last delivery of the day. One pressed tuxedo, marked urgent, client pickup, to be dropped off by hand at the Avondale Royale, a hotel I had only ever passed on my way to cheaper parts of the city. The place looked like it had been carved from light. Marble steps, glass doors taller than the city trees. 2 doormen in black coats with gold trim didn't even look at me when I walked in, dripping wet, holding a garment bag too big for my frame. The lobby was nearly silent. Soft jazz played somewhere I couldn't place. The carpet swallowed my steps, and I swear even my breath felt out of place. I looked at my delivery slip again. Suite 47B, penthouse concierge desk, personal handoff. I pressed the elevator button. I half expected it to reject me like the building knew I didn't belong. But it opened. The ride up was smooth, too smooth. My reflection in the mirror-lined walls looked thinner than usual, pale. The red hoodie I wore under my plastic poncho clung to my arms like it was apologizing for being there. When the doors opened, I found myself standing in a hallway that didn't look real. Everything was gold-trimmed. The lighting was soft, indirect, the scent expensive, like warm cedar in winter. But no one was at the concierge desk. No one was anywhere. I waited 5 minutes. 10. My shoes had started to squelch on the marble floor. The garment bag was slipping from my hand. I stepped around the corner, trying to find anyone to take the tuxedo, but all the doors were shut. The entire floor was eerily quiet. And then, at the far end of the corridor, I saw a small lounge, an open door, with light spilling out. That's where I made the first decision I would regret. I stepped inside. I told myself it was just to stay dry, just to wait, just to breathe for a second. I didn't know the room had motion-activated security. I didn't know it was one of the few VIP lounges monitored 24/7. I didn't know I was about to be seen. And most of all, I didn't know who would be watching. The first thing I noticed was how warm it was. Not just heated, but designed to feel like a place untouched by weather or time. The walls were paneled in dark oak, lined with books I was sure no one had opened in years. A single leather armchair sat beside a low marble table, next to a tray with 2 crystal tumblers, empty, pristine, not even watermarked. It didn't look like a waiting room. It looked like someone had tried to recreate silence itself. I stood just inside the doorway, dripping onto the hardwood floor. A soft carpet stretched out under my feet like I'd stepped onto something sacred. I hesitated, but the sound of thunder cracked through the window behind me, and my shivering legs made the decision for me. I stepped further in. There was no camera that I could see, no signs, just a low hum somewhere in the walls, HVAC, maybe, or security systems I wasn't smart enough to notice. I told myself it would be 30 seconds, just long enough to wipe the rain from my face, squeeze the water from my sleeves, maybe use the paper towel I kept balled in my bag to dry the tuxedo cover. I set the garment bag carefully on the arm of the chair. I unzipped my poncho and peeled it off like skin, cold and limp in my hands. My red hoodie underneath was soaked through. It clung to me in ways that made me suddenly conscious of my own body, something I usually didn't have the luxury of thinking about. I remember looking over my shoulder. Once. Just once. And when I didn't see anyone, I pulled my hoodie over my head, careful, fast, just to get it off. My tank top underneath was thin, almost transparent from the rain, but at least it wasn't dripping. I reached into my bag for the spare shirt I kept for emergencies, white, plain, wrinkled from being shoved under books and receipts. I stood there, in the stillness of that impossible room, unsure if I was being reckless or just surviving. Maybe both. The silence was too complete. The air felt watched, but I couldn't explain why. I told myself I was being paranoid, just tired, just cold. But there was a strange weight in the air, like I had walked into someone else's story without meaning to. I slid the clean shirt on, buttoned it clumsily with damp fingers, and as I ran the towel gently over my hair, a quiet voice in the back of my mind whispered something I'd later wish I had listened to. You shouldn't be here. But the damage had already been done. Not in the way you might expect, not in anything I did or said or touched, but in the fact that I thought no one had seen. The shirt clung a little less than the hoodie, but it was still damp around the collar. I sat down for a moment on the edge of the leather chair, careful not to leave a stain. My fingers were still trembling slightly from the cold. Or maybe from something else. I didn't know. The room was so still it almost didn't feel real. A space like that, dim, elegant, undisturbed, had no business holding someone like me. My backpack slumped at my feet, a cheap canvas thing I'd stitched 3 times. It looked like a wound against the polished floor. I started to reach for the tuxedo again when a small red light caught my eye. Just a flicker. High in the far corner of the room. I squinted. Could have been an exit sensor, or a motion detector. I didn't think much of it. In my world, cameras were part of the background. At the corner store, at the laundromat, at the apartment complex stairwell where someone once mugged my neighbor for a food stamp card. You got used to being seen without being acknowledged, so I didn't notice. Didn't stop to wonder if this particular room, the one they didn't even lock, might have been watching back. If I had, maybe I would have buttoned the shirt faster. Maybe I would have stood further from the light. Maybe I would have kept the hoodie on, wet or not. But I didn't. And somewhere, beyond the silence, beyond the rain, a live feed blinked on. Quiet, clean, high definition, streaming me to someone I didn't even know existed yet. I wasn't supposed to be watching the cameras that night. It wasn't part of my job anymore. Not really. I hadn't done routine operations in years. That's what the team was for. Protocols, managers, systems that were supposed to run without me. But the system had glitched twice in 1 week, and when my tech lead didn't respond to my texts after 9 p.m., I logged in myself, more out of habit than anything. The interface was the same grid of floors, same red blips when motion was detected. Suite 47B's private lounge had triggered a flag unusual this late at night. That floor was reserved for legacy clients, the kind who didn't order pizza or wander in soaking wet. I clicked the feed and froze. She was standing there, halfway into the room, clothes clinging to her like a second skin. Not posed, not seductive, just tired. Like the night had gone 2 steps too far. I should have looked away. God knows I had every reason to. But something about her felt off, not in the way that demanded security, but in the way that gnawed at memory. She was moving fast, nervously, folding something into her bag, tugging at the sleeves of a clean shirt like it didn't belong to her. I leaned forward slightly, squinting, not at her face, but at her neck. Something caught the light. Faint. Small. A tattoo or maybe just a bruise. But the shape of it, that outline, no, it couldn't be. I reached for the keyboard, paused the frame. It was blurry, but not enough to lie. A small symbol, tucked just beneath her collarbone, barely the size of a quarter. A circle, intersected by a diagonal branch. My breath stilled. I had seen that mark before. Once, years ago, and only on one person. I didn't move, not for a full minute. The image stayed on screen, frozen at that exact frame, her head bent, arms mid-motion, damp hair clinging to her cheek. There was nothing staged about it, nothing aware. She wasn't performing for anyone. She didn't know she was being watched. That's what stopped me. It wasn't her body. I've seen enough to be numb to that. It was her face. More specifically, it was the absence of anything performative in it. No tension in the jaw, no tilt of the chin. Just exhaustion. And that mark, that impossible mark. I hadn't thought about it in over a decade. Not since the last time I saw it, etched in pen on the inside flap of a notebook. My wife's notebook. The last one she carried into the hospital before she never walked back out. It was a design she came up with for a project she loved more than anything in the world. A personal emblem she used only for one thing: her outreach program for girls in shelters and foster care. The initiative ended with her. I buried the idea with her, too. No one knew about that mark but me. She never trademarked it, never put it online. It wasn't meant to be commercial. It was meant to be sacred. And yet here it was, inked permanently into the skin of a stranger who had just accidentally walked into my building like she had nothing left to lose. The thought made my throat tighten. There was no protocol for this. I wasn't supposed to be watching the cameras. I wasn't supposed to feel this. But I didn't shut the screen. I watched her finish buttoning her shirt. She fumbled a little with the last two buttons. Then she sat, just for a moment. Closed her eyes like she needed the room to hold her up. Then she stood again, picked up the tuxedo bag I now realized she had come to deliver, and left. Like it never happened, like none of us would remember. But I would. Because for the first time in years, something got past the armor. Not desire, not guilt, but something quieter, like recognition. And in the pit of my stomach, a thought settled so fast it scared me. She's connected to her. She used to draw it in the margins of everything: menus, receipts, envelopes she never meant to mail. A simple circle, cut through by a branch with 3 leaves. To anyone else, it looked like a doodle. But to her, it meant something. "It's a sparrow in flight," she once told me, tracing it on my palm during one of her chemo nights. But it's also a compass. For girls who've been lost so long, they don't know which way home is anymore. Her name was Elise, and she was the only person who ever made the penthouse feel like something warmer than glass and stone. Elise believed in grace, in second chances, in kids who never had a real start. She worked nights at the juvenile shelter long before we were married. She used her own paycheck to print brochures for a program she called North Sparrow, a mentorship system that quietly funneled funds, transportation, even therapy access to girls ages 10 to 17. No press, no photos, just connection. She wore the symbol on a silver pendant, said it reminded her why she got up in the morning. When she died, I couldn't bring myself to touch her desk for months. The pendant stayed sealed in a drawer until I packed it away. No one else knew what it meant. I never explained it to the foundation board when they offered to continue her work. I declined, shut it down, said we'd shift our focus. What I meant was, I couldn't look at it without breaking. So how did this girl, this stranger with tired eyes and trembling hands, have that symbol under her skin? Was she part of Elise's last outreach group? Someone she mentored directly? Or had the girl taken the design from somewhere else? A fluke? A copy? I didn't know. But what I did know, beyond any doubt, was that her presence wasn't random. She didn't know me, but something told me I knew part of her. And if Elise had met her, even once, she would have never forgotten. Neither would I. The voicemail came at 8:12 the next morning. I was hunched over a cracked countertop in our kitchen, trying to get the stove to click on. Ezra had school in 30 minutes and no breakfast yet. I didn't recognize the number, so I ignored it at first. But when I finally listened, the voice was calm, polite, and terrifyingly formal. "Miss Monette, this is Claire from Avondale Royale's executive office. Mr. Hart would like a brief word regarding an internal matter from yesterday evening. Could you return to the property at your earliest convenience?" No explanation, no details, just enough professionalism to make my stomach turn. My first thought? I'd crossed a line. I replayed every second of the night before. The empty lounge, the brief moment of privacy I shouldn't have taken. The camera I'd maybe imagined, but now couldn't stop thinking about. I didn't have the luxury to ignore the call. People like me don't risk pissing off anyone with money or influence, especially when your name's tied to a delivery invoice they can trace. So I put on my cleanest shirt, washed my hair in the sink, told Ezra to take the emergency 20 in the cookie tin for lunch. Then I walked out, heart pounding like it had somewhere better to be. The subway ride was a blur. I kept checking my phone as if they might call again and say it was a mistake. They didn't. The doorman at Avondale didn't ask questions this time, just nodded stiffly and waved me in like I belonged, which, ironically, made me feel even more like I didn't. I was directed to a private elevator. No buttons, no music. Just glass and silence and my own reflection staring back at me like, "What the hell are you doing here?" When the doors opened, the hallway was empty, just a matte black door at the end, slightly ajar. I raised my hand to knock. It felt like knocking on consequence. I took a breath and stepped in. He was already standing when I entered. Tall, neatly pressed. The kind of presence that fills a room without saying a word. Not movie star handsome, but composed, controlled. Like nothing about him had been left to chance. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows. No tie, just a crisp white shirt and a look that made my breath catch without knowing why. "Miss Monette," he said, nodding once. "Thank you for coming." I nodded back, unsure where to put my hands. He gestured toward the chair in front of his desk. I sat slowly, like I might break the leather. He didn't sit. He walked around the desk, leaned on the edge, folded his arms. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was surgical, like he was giving me space to speak, but knew I wouldn't. "I'm not in trouble, am I?" I asked, trying to sound casual. It came out like gravel. "No," he said simply. but something came to my attention yesterday. Something unusual. I blinked. He didn't continue, so I did. If this is about the lounge, I said quietly. I wasn't trying to look. It was raining. No one was there, and I thought it was just a break room. I didn't take anything. I didn't even sit down. You did sit down, he corrected gently, for about 20 seconds. My stomach dropped. There was a camera. I stared at him, trying to read his tone. Was this shame? Accusation? Curiosity? But instead of continuing down that path, he said something that knocked the air out of me. That tattoo, just below your collarbone. Where did you get it? I froze. I hadn't even realized it showed. The shirt I wore was buttoned, but not all the way. The mark must have peeked out while I was adjusting my bag or shifting in the chair. I stiffened. Why? Because I've seen it before, he said. But only once. My mouth went dry. He didn't press, just waited, like someone used to people eventually filling silences. I was 16, I finally said. Got it in a bathroom, stick and poke. My mom had a sketch of it in one of her old journals. Said it meant stay alive, find home. I never asked where she got it. I just liked how it looked, like something that wasn't scared. His face changed, not dramatically, just a shift, a crack in the smooth surface. What was your mother's name? He asked, softer now. I hesitated. Celeste Monette. The name landed. Hard. He didn't react outwardly, but his shoulders pulled slightly inward, like a man absorbing more than he expected. I knew her, he said. And suddenly I didn't know which part scared me more. The fact that he'd seen me when I didn't know it, or the fact that he might have known her, long before I ever did. He stood up then, slowly, like whatever came next needed more weight than sitting aloud. Without a word, he crossed the room to a drawer in the tall oak cabinet behind his desk. I watched him unlock it, pull out a plain manila envelope, and hold it in both hands for a second, almost like he was deciding whether to hand it over. Then he did. Take a look, he said, voice lower now, not cautious, careful. I hesitated, then slid the contents onto my lap. First, a photograph, faded around the edges, time-stamped in a font I hadn't seen since early 2000s camcorders. A woman, early 30s, short dark hair, warm smile, stood in front of a brick building with a child. A little girl with tangled curls and scraped knees. Me. I didn't remember the photo being taken, didn't even remember that day. But I knew the building, a temporary housing shelter. We'd lived there for 4 months after my mom lost her second job. The woman beside me in the photo wasn't my mother, but her hand was on my shoulder like she'd known me, like she'd meant to protect something. There was a chain around her neck, and hanging from it, the exact same symbol I'd had tattooed near my collarbone. A sparrow in flight, 3-point wing, circular tail. I looked up at him, the envelope still in my lap. You knew her? I asked. He nodded. Her name was Elise. She was my wife. The air left my lungs. He sat down finally, across from me this time. She ran a mentorship initiative, he continued. Unlisted, private, focused on girls in shelters. Sometimes she visited them, met the families, helped cover things quietly: bus fare, medical, school uniforms. She didn't keep records. Said paper trails made people nervous. He gestured to the second item I hadn't opened. I unfolded the note slowly. The paper was thick, off-white, edges curling like it had been touched too often. It was in her handwriting. October 19th, 2008. Raina is small but fierce. She clung to her mother's side like her life depended on it, and maybe it did. There's something about her sharp and stubborn, like she's already learned too much. I left a copy of the sparrow sketch with her mom. Maybe one day, Raina will make it hers. My hands trembled. The room felt too big. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I don't know what it means that you're here now, but I think Elise would have wanted me to find out. And just like that, the question shifted from, what did I do wrong, to what did she leave behind in me? I didn't say yes right away. I walked out of that office with the envelope clutched to my chest like it might disappear if I blinked. My hands didn't stop shaking for hours. The photo, the letter, her name. Elise felt like someone had yanked a string I didn't know was tied to my chest. That night, I sat on the floor of our living room while Ezra did his math homework on the couch, and I reread the letter under the dull light of our desk lamp. The words were so plain, so unpoetic, but they undid something in me. She clung to her mother like her life depended on it. She had seen me, even then. I asked Ezra if he remembered the woman from the shelter. He didn't, but he said something I haven't stopped thinking about since. Sometimes the people who save you don't even stick around long enough for you to notice. The next morning, I went back to the Avondale. This time, I didn't wear my delivery uniform. I wore the closest thing I had to a clean button-up and the jeans without holes. No one stopped me at the door. Caleb was waiting in the same office, but his posture was different this time. Less formal. More unsure. Like he didn't know what version of me would walk in. I didn't sit. I stood there, envelope still in hand, and said, "What do you want from me exactly?" He didn't dodge the question. "I want to restart Elise's initiative," he said. Quietly, respectfully, with someone who understands what it meant. And I think that might be you. I laughed, but not out of humor. "I steam suits for a living," I said. "I know how to get red wine out of silk. That's it." He shook his head. "You know survival. You know how to read a room. And you know what it means to carry something heavy without dropping it." I looked at the photo again. I saw a woman who hadn't just shown up to hand out donations. She had stood beside me, in it, briefly, but fully. I took a breath. "I'll do it," I said. "But not as a symbol, and not as a pity project." He nodded, slowly. Noted. That was the first real yes I'd said in years. Not out of fear, not out of guilt, but because deep down, some part of me wanted to know who Elise thought I could become. We didn't talk much, at least not at first. Caleb wasn't the type to fill silence. He gave direction in short sentences, always precise, always measured, but never unkind. The work started small, cataloging old files from Elise's original project, reaching out to local shelters to see which ones still remembered her name, cross-referencing intake forms with funding receipts that had no real system, because Elise had operated on instinct, not bureaucracy. I spent the first 2 days behind a desk in a conference room that smelled faintly of lemon oil and old paper. I read letters she had written by hand, notes in the margins with hearts next to certain names. Some of those names matched the scribbles I remembered from my mother's old journals. I hadn't thought about those notebooks in years, but when I went home that night, I dug one out from a storage box we used as a makeshift coffee table. Page 12, right there between a grocery list and a prayer in Spanish, was the sparrow sketch. She'd copied it almost exactly. The next day, I brought the page with me. Caleb didn't say anything when I slid it across the table. Just looked at it for a long moment, then folded it gently and placed it in a small wooden box on his desk. That's how it was with him. No grand speeches, no emotional outbursts, just small acts of recognition. At the end of the first week, he asked if I wanted coffee before we started. I said no, but appreciated the offer. The week after that, he saved me the last of the lemon scones from the break room, placed in a paper napkin without comment. By the third week, I realized I was starting to look forward to mornings. Not to him, exactly, but to the work, to the way he never asked me to be anything other than who I was, to the strange, steady rhythm of typing next to someone who didn't expect performance. He didn't flirt, he didn't praise, but he noticed things, like how I used my thumb to smooth the edge of every folder before filing it, or how I always checked the emergency exits in any room we entered. One afternoon, I caught him watching me as I double-checked a grant form for errors. His expression wasn't curiosity or admiration. It was something quieter, like recognition. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't flinch under it. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of slow, rainy day where the city feels wrapped in wet wool. The inbox was quiet. We were reviewing volunteer profiles for the Sparrow relaunch. Mostly college students and social workers trying to pivot from burnout. Caleb had stepped out for a call, left his mug still steaming beside a half-marked spreadsheet. When he came back, I was staring at a profile photo of a girl who looked barely older than me, her intake notes full of foster moves and runaway flags. He sat down across from me, didn't speak right away, so I did. "I've never been in love," I said. He didn't blink, didn't shift in his seat. "Not really," I continued. "I've tried. Dated guys from school, hooked up once or twice, but it never stuck. I never trusted it, or them, or myself around them." Still nothing from him, just presence, stillness. "It's not fear," I added. "It's just, when you grow up expecting everything to fall apart, you don't build anything with soft edges, not even your heart." He nodded once, slow, thoughtful. Then he went back to sorting applications like I hadn't just said something I'd never told anyone before. But I noticed the pause in his hand when he reached for his pen. The way his fingers stayed still for a beat too long. That was enough. I didn't need a speech. I didn't want sympathy. I just wanted someone to know the truth about me. And for the first time, I didn't regret saying it out loud. I was looking for the grant proposal file. That's the part that still gets me. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't curious. I just wanted to double-check the language on one of the funding clauses before submitting it for legal review. Caleb had stepped out to meet with one of the board chairs. Said he'd be gone 15 minutes. Tops. His office was quiet, as always. Clean lines, glass shelves, one muted abstract painting he never talked about. His tablet was unlocked. Normally, I wouldn't touch it. But the file we needed had been saved there earlier that morning, and he'd told me to grab whatever I needed. I tapped into the recent folder list. That's when I saw it. A thumbnail marked with only a date and time, no label, no title. The timestamp matched that night. The one I thought no one had seen. I stared at it for a few seconds, then tapped. The video loaded in silence. No sound. just grainy security footage angled slightly from above, slightly to the left. Me, walking into the lounge, soaking wet, hesitant, folding my poncho, sitting down, pulling off my hoodie. I froze. I could feel my heart thudding, not in my chest, but in my throat. My hand moved to the pause button, but didn't press it. I watched myself lean forward, adjust my shirt, wipe at the rain on my skin. Vulnerable, exposed. I'd told myself that moment belonged to no one, but someone had kept it, saved it, watched it. My hands were shaking when I locked the screen and set the tablet down. Not in anger, not yet. It was something colder, like something sacred had been cracked open without permission. The door opened behind me a few minutes later. I didn't turn. He must have sensed it instantly. "Raina?" he said, voice tentative. I didn't answer. He crossed the room slowly. When he saw the tablet, still glowing faintly on the desk, I felt the air shift. "You saw it," he said. I turned then. My face was blank, too numb for rage. "You watched me," I said, barely a whisper. "Back then, and you kept it." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "You had this proof of me at my most undone, and you didn't say anything, not when we started working together, not when you handed me that photo. Nothing." His silence was too long, too loud. I stepped back. "I thought I was safe here." That's when his expression finally cracked. Regret, deep and raw. But I didn't want it. Not in that moment. Not after seeing myself as footage. Not after realizing I'd been a file in a folder on someone else's device. So I left. Didn't say another word. Didn't take the envelope. Didn't look back. He showed up at my building the next morning. No security escort. No umbrella. Just him, standing outside the rusted gate, looking like a man who hadn't slept. Maybe he hadn't. I didn't open the door, but I did go down. He didn't speak right away, just watched me through the bars like he wasn't sure I'd come out at all. "I didn't share it," he said finally. "No one else saw it. I swear to you." "That's not the point," I replied. Rain had started to fall again. Thin, quiet, the kind that soaks in slowly. I stayed where I was, under the tiny overhang above the entry. "You should have deleted it," I said, softer now. "Or told me. Anything but hiding it." His face tightened, but he didn't defend himself. He just nodded, slowly. "You looked so raw," he murmured. "That night. Like the whole world had worn you down, but you still held yourself together. No, I cut in. Don't make it poetic." He flinched, just a little. "You watched a moment that wasn't yours," I said. "And then you built a version of me in your head before you even asked who I was. I didn't want to scare you away. You did anyway." He looked down, hands in his coat pockets, like he didn't know what to do with them anymore. "I don't trust people easily," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "But I trusted you. I trusted this place. And now I can't walk into that building without wondering who's watching, what else I never saw." "Raina," he said, stepping closer. "Let me fix this." "You can't." My voice cracked on that one. And that's when I realized this wasn't about the footage. Not entirely. It was about how I let myself believe I was safe. Again. And how wrong I'd been. "I need space," I said. "Not promises. Not explanations." He nodded again, but he didn't move. So I did. I turned, walked back up the stairs, and closed the door behind me. No dramatic slam, just quiet. And for the next 2 days, I didn't answer calls, didn't respond to emails, didn't open the project folders we'd been building together for weeks. I disappeared, because disappearing was the only defense I'd ever learned that worked. And for the first time since we met, Caleb didn't try to break through it. He let the silence sit. And I hated how much that hurt, too. I sat in my office with the lights off. The city buzzed outside the glass horns, wind, a siren somewhere far, but it all felt 1,000,000 miles away. I couldn't stop replaying the way she looked at me. Not angry, not accusing, just disappointed. And somehow that was worse. I'd told myself I watched that video because it mattered, because she mattered, because something in her reminded me of grace I'd lost. But the truth was simpler and harder. I watched because I could, because I had the power to look into someone's moment without their consent, because I hadn't asked myself what it cost her, because deep down, I wanted her to mean something before I even gave her the chance to choose whether she wanted to. And now she was gone, just like Marin, just like everyone else who had once made this office feel less cold. I thought I was protecting her by saying nothing. But silence, I'm learning, is often just another way of control. That day, she stepped into the lounge, wet from the rain, uncomfortable but brave. That wasn't just a moment on a screen. It was the beginning of something real. And now I'd reduced it to footage, a secret, a risk, and worse, I'd reduced her to someone who had to walk away just to reclaim her own agency. I didn't just violate her privacy. I'd violated the only honest thing that had entered my life in years. Raina didn't need my apology. She needed proof that I understood what I'd broken, and I had no idea if I still had time to give it to her. It started with a box I hadn't opened in 7 years. Marin's things. She hated clutter, so there hadn't been much. A journal, a broken camera, some old photos from her teaching days. I kept the box sealed, telling myself grief had no use for nostalgia. But that night, I opened it, not because I missed Marin, but because I missed Raina, and somehow, something told me the two were connected. It wasn't just the tattoo, or the way she moved through a room like she was trying not to take up space. It was the necklace, the sparrow. Marin's necklace had carried that tiny sparrow pendant ever since I met her. She said it was a gift from one of her students' mothers, given after a year of mentoring a girl with a difficult home life. Said she never saw them again after the family moved. Said she kept the necklace as a reminder. Not every story she walked into had a clean ending. I found the photo in the bottom of the box creased, almost torn. Marin stood in a community garden, laughing, hair in a ponytail. Next to her, a girl no more than 11. Skinny arms, big eyes, curly hair. A little version of Raina. I didn't want to believe it at first, but I knew. Her eyes hadn't changed. There was a letter behind the photo, a thank you note in Marin's handwriting. She'd written it to herself, something she did sometimes when she didn't want to forget. It read, Raina, quiet but fierce, doesn't trust easily. But when she smiles, it feels like the world hasn't lost yet. If there's anything I do right in this life, let it be giving her 1 more year of hope. I sat there with that letter in my lap until the sun began to rise. The timeline made sense. Raina would have been in one of the shelter programs Marin volunteered at before we met. And if she'd moved, lost contact, she probably never knew, which meant she'd walked into my life by accident, but stayed because something in her felt drawn to what she didn't remember. She wasn't a symbol. She wasn't fate. She was real, and I had watched her through glass like a stranger. But she had been my wife's girl once, someone Marin believed in, protected, loved. That changed everything. I made a call to legal. Quietly. No questions asked. I asked them to check if her name had ever crossed the Sparrow Youth Grant records. 10 minutes later, I had the answer. Yes, Raina Ellis had been the youngest recipient of the Marin Scholarship Pilot Fund, the same program we shelved after she died. She had always belonged to this place, long before I watched her, long before I failed her. Now the only question was, would she ever let me try again? I didn't call, didn't text, didn't ask someone to find her. I just went to the one place I thought she might feel safe enough to breathe, Riverview Park. It was small, tucked between an old elementary school and a run-down library, the kind of park where no one made eye contact, and the only sounds were wind in the trees and kids too young to care about shame. I saw her before she saw me. She was sitting alone on a bench near the fountain, hair tied up, backpack at her feet, a book in her lap, but she wasn't reading, just staring ahead, quiet, still. I didn't approach right away. I stood back for a moment, reminding myself that just because I had something to say didn't mean she owed me her time. Then, slowly, I walked over. She didn't look up at first. Then she did. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, not with fear, not even anger, just weariness, like someone tired of figuring out if people meant what they said. I sat down on the far end of the bench, left 2 feet of space between us, said nothing. For almost a full minute, we sat like that. The wind carried a leaf past my shoes. A bird landed, then flew off again. Then I placed the photo and the letter between us. She glanced down and froze. Her hand hovered over the page but didn't touch it. I spoke, but only once. This was from my wife, before she passed. She worked with you, back then. You probably don't remember. She didn't blink, just kept staring at the photo. I didn't know when I saw you on that screen. I didn't know anything. And then I kept not knowing because I was afraid to ask. Silence. Then her voice flat, low, but steady. That's me? I nodded. Yeah. She touched the corner of the photo gently. Her thumb trembled. She taught me how to braid my hair. Gave me a book when my mom didn't show up for 3 nights in a row. I remember her voice. Soft. She said the world wouldn't stay broken forever. Her eyes welled, but no tears fell. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. Finally, she looked at me. Really looked. You knew this before or after the video? After, I said. Long after, and that's why I'm not here to ask for anything. She held my gaze for a long time, then nodded. That's the first honest thing you've said. I stood, left the photo and the letter on the bench. I just thought you deserved to know whose memory you've been carrying all this time. She didn't respond, didn't ask me to stay. But she didn't walk away either. As I turned and left, I didn't feel lighter, but I felt clearer. And sometimes that's the first real step toward redemption. I didn't go home after the park. I walked. No direction, just moving, like my legs knew something my heart hadn't caught up to. The photo still in my pocket, the letter folded but heavy. It was strange how something I hadn't remembered could feel more familiar than anything else in my life. Her face, her handwriting, the way she described me, like I mattered. I had spent most of my adult life rewriting myself. New resume, new address, new version of me that didn't flinch when people raised their voice or asked where I grew up. But that letter cracked something, because it meant someone had seen me before I even had the words to ask for help. And Caleb? He didn't beg. He didn't explain. He just gave me the truth and left me space. That silence did more for me than any apology could. For years I told myself that I was strong because I cut ties with my past. But walking through the city now, I wasn't sure that was strength. Maybe it was fear in disguise. I hadn't escaped my childhood. I had just hidden from it long enough to believe it couldn't find me. But it had, through a necklace, through a man I didn't expect to care, through a memory I didn't know I'd left behind. I sat on the steps outside my building and stared at the sky. For once, I didn't feel ashamed of where I came from. I felt rooted, and I knew I wasn't done with him. Not yet. I was brushing my teeth when my phone buzzed the first time, then again, and again. By the time I wiped the foam from my mouth and picked it up, there were 15 messages. 3 missed calls. The first text was from a girl I hadn't spoken to in months. Is this really you? I didn't understand. Then came the link. Just a grainy thumbnail, but I recognized it instantly. My own body, half-turned, mid-movement. That moment, the moment from the lounge, now frozen into a still image. The caption? Hotel heiress or hired scandal. CEO's assistant caught in compromising moment. I dropped the phone. It hit the floor with a thud. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I had spent weeks crawling out of the hole that moment had put me in. I had buried it behind silence, behind purpose, behind the work. And now someone had dragged it back into the light. Twisted, stripped of truth. I picked up the phone again, refreshed the page. Already 10,000 views, already comments piling up, some laughing, some accusing, some worse. It was everywhere within an hour. Blog posts, reaction videos, Twitter threads, not the whole footage, but enough. Blurry, but not enough to protect me. The hotel name was blurred. My face wasn't. That's the part that cut the deepest. I paced the apartment. Panic morphing into nausea, then into something harder. Anger. Because I hadn't given anyone that video. I hadn't even known it existed until the day I found it by accident. Which meant someone kept it. Someone leaked it. And I only knew one person who ever had that file. The knock came 20 minutes later. Caleb. Hair slightly messy, shirt untucked, face pale in a way I'd never seen. He didn't speak at first, just held out a folded document. I didn't take it. What is it? I asked. Proof, he said quietly. That I deleted it, legally, permanently. It's notarized. Signed. I don't know how this got out. I swear to you, Raina, I don't. The ache in my chest was loud. I didn't think you'd let it exist long enough for someone to steal it. His jaw clenched. You're right. I shouldn't have. He sat down on the edge of the couch like the weight was too much. I made one copy. One. On a private drive. I thought I had wiped everything. Clearly, I was wrong. I looked away. The room was spinning. It wasn't just about the image. It was about everything it brought back. Shame, exposure, that feeling of being watched, judged, misunderstood. Again. "Why didn't you tell me there was a copy?" I asked. He hesitated, and in that pause, everything fell apart. The press conference wasn't Caleb's idea. It was mine. Because for the first time in my life, I was done being explained by other people, by rumors, by footage, by cropped headlines and out-of-context stills. This time, I would speak for myself. We stood behind the podium together, bright lights in our faces, a half-dozen microphones stretched toward our mouths like waiting jaws. Caleb spoke first. Calm, clear. No PR gloss, no legal disclaimers. "My name is Caleb Whitmore. I'm the CEO of the Halcyon Group, and I'm responsible for the environment that allowed a private moment to be recorded and then lost." Gasps, flashbulbs. He didn't flinch. "I failed to protect someone I brought into this building, and that's not just an HR problem. That's a moral one." He turned to me, then stepped back. It was my turn. I didn't have a speech. I had a voice. "My name is Raina Wells," I began, voice quieter than I meant it to be. "I was a housekeeping assistant, a night shift temp. I never expected to meet a CEO, let alone work for one." I paused. Somewhere in the second row, someone tilted their head, curious. I didn't undress to be provocative. I was drenched from rain, I was cold, and I thought I was alone. That's all. No flashbulb this time, just silence. I didn't know there was a camera. I didn't know someone would see, and when I found out later, I left. Deep breath. My first instinct was to disappear, because for people like me, people who grew up with no safety net, no family, no protection, we survive by becoming invisible. I looked over at Caleb. He met my eyes without blinking. But Caleb found me again, not to cover up a scandal, not to silence me. He brought me a letter, a necklace, a part of my childhood I didn't even know I'd lost, and for the first time, someone connected the dots between my past and my future. A few reporters scribbled, others just listened. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but there was nothing left to mourn. I'm not a headline. I'm not a mistake, and I'm not going to apologize for surviving. Someone in the back started clapping, hesitant, unsure, then a few more, until it filled the room like rain after a drought. We didn't smile. We just stood there, side by side, letting the truth echo a little longer. Outside, the sky was overcast. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like hiding. The email came 3 days after the press conference. Simple subject line. From Claire. A friend of Evelyn. I read it twice before I realized who Evelyn was. Caleb's wife. The woman whose name was still whispered with reverence in certain corners of the city. Not because she was a socialite, but because she used to be a teacher, a reformer. The kind of woman who started things that outlived her. I hesitated before opening the message. Inside was only a paragraph. Raina, I've followed what happened, quietly, respectfully. And I recognize something I haven't seen in a long time. Evelyn spoke about you once. You were just a child then. Would you meet me? There's a project I'd like you to consider. It's time to continue something she never got to finish." There was no pressure, no flattery, just the offer of something solid and strangely personal. When I met Claire 2 days later, I was still skeptical. She welcomed me into a sunlit office in a restored school building downtown. Her hair was silver, her presence calm like weathered stone. "I don't want to fix your life," she said, without preamble. "I want you to lead something." She showed me plans, a mentorship program for girls aging out of foster care, most of them forgotten by every system meant to help them, the kind of girls I used to see in the mirror. "There's funding," she continued. "There's space. But what we don't have is someone who understands them from the inside out. Evelyn thought that might be you, even then." I didn't answer right away. Something inside me was both terrified and wide awake. "I'm not a symbol," I finally said. Claire smiled gently. "No, you're a beginning." I almost didn't go. The night before the launch, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the invitation card. It was simple cream cardstock, serif font, no photos, just my name at the bottom, listed as Program Director, Sparrow Rise Initiative. I wasn't used to seeing my name tied to anything permanent, but something in me had shifted, not because the internet had moved on, not because Caleb had forgiven me, or because I'd forgiven him, but because I finally believed I had something to give that wasn't tied to my survival story, something forward-facing. Claire met me at the entrance of the small community center where the event was held. No red carpet, no news vans, just rows of folding chairs and girls with guarded eyes. I recognized their expressions. I used to wear them. When she handed me the mic, I didn't have anything rehearsed. So I told the truth. "I used to believe that silence was strength," I began. "That if I could stay quiet long enough, the world would forget I didn't belong." A few of them looked up. I kept going. "I used to clean hotel rooms. Then one day, I made a mistake. I thought I was alone. I wasn't. That mistake became a video. That video became a scandal. And suddenly, people had opinions about a woman they'd never met." I paused, feeling my hands tremble slightly. I wanted to disappear. Again. But someone didn't let me. Someone gave me a letter and a necklace and a truth I didn't know I'd been waiting for. Now the room was still. "I'm not here because of a man. I'm here because I didn't stop walking, even when the road looked like shame." Then I looked at the girls in the front row, some of them barely 17. "I don't want to save you," I said, voice steadier now. "I want to see you. I want to build something that will outlast my name, something that started as pain and became purpose." Claire smiled at me from the side, and I realized this wasn't the beginning I had dreamed of. It was better, because I didn't choose it. It chose me. That night, after the launch, I walked out into the chill air and found Caleb waiting beside his car. No driver, no security, just him in a dark coat, hands in his pockets, like he'd been standing there for hours. We hadn't spoken since the press conference. I'd seen him watching from the back of the room earlier, never once trying to interrupt, never stepping forward. Now, under the streetlight, he looked different. Less like a man who built towers, more like one who finally understood what it meant to have something to lose. "You didn't need to come," I said. He nodded. "I didn't, but I wanted to." We stood in silence for a beat. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "I kept something," he said. "Not as a secret, as a promise." He handed it to me. Inside was the necklace, the little sparrow pendant I'd only seen once years ago, in a blurry photo inside a yellowing envelope. Now it rested in my palm, warm from his touch. "She wore this the day she left," he said, voice low. "She told me the sparrow was about survival, that even the smallest things still fight the wind." I looked up. "You don't owe me this," I said. "I know," he replied, "but I think it belongs with the person she once believed in, even before I did." I closed my fingers around the necklace. It was heavier than I expected, but it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like something returned, something forgiven. "Why now?" I asked, softly. He gave a tired smile. "Because every time I looked at it, I kept thinking maybe love was about preserving something, but I think she would have wanted me to pass it on. I didn't say thank you. That didn't feel like enough. So instead, I unclasped the chain, reached behind my neck, and fastened it for the first time. The pendant rested just below my collarbone, right where my scar used to be, right where her symbol once was, right where I'd carried every part of me I thought I had to hide. "Looks better on you," he whispered. The moment didn't ask for anything more. Not a kiss, not a promise. Just presence, just history, handing itself to the future, quietly, tenderly, like a sparrow, landing after a long flight. I never used to sit by the window, not on buses, not in waiting rooms, not in planes. Something about it made me feel too exposed, like if I looked out, someone might look in. But today, I did. The sun was starting to set, washing the clinic's hallway in a golden light. I had just finished reviewing the first grant applications for the girls. Their stories still echoed in my chest, so different from mine, and yet painfully familiar. Caleb passed by earlier. He didn't say much, just rested his hand lightly on my shoulder and kept walking. That was enough. No performance, no resolution, just presence. I sat down by the long stretch of windows near the west wing, the city sprawling out beneath me, people moving in tiny specks, unaware of how someone on the 12th floor was finally breathing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to run. I wasn't hiding behind work or guilt or fear of being found out. I wasn't wondering who was watching or what they were thinking. I wasn't rehearsing how to leave. I was just sitting. Still. Here. The pendant lay warm on my skin, catching the last bit of sunlight. Not a scar. Not a symbol of pain anymore. Just mine. A nurse walked by and smiled. I smiled back, and for once, I didn't flinch. I didn't pretend to be someone else. I didn't look away. I stayed, and I looked straight ahead. I sat in the window seat, and I didn't look away.